The Chicago Bears asked Kyler Gordon to do a lot as a rookie, probably too much, and he struggled a little bit throughout the season. But now entering his first full offseason with the Bears, we're already hearing about concrete signs of improvement for him entering year two.
You are Locked On Bears, your daily Chicago Bears podcast. Part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
This is Locked On Bears, and I'm your host, Lorin Cox. I'm here to bring you your daily, in-depth Chicago Bears news and analysis. You can follow me on Twitter at CoxSports1. You can follow the podcast on Twitter at Locked On Bears. You can like Locked On Bears on Facebook. Join the Locked On Bears Facebook group for even more Bears talk. And make sure you hit that subscribe button on the Locked On Bears YouTube channel to keep up with all of our video podcasts as well. Thanks for making Locked On Bears your first listen today. We're part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day. And we particularly appreciate our everydayers tuning in 5 days a week for your daily Bears fix. On the show today, we're going to talk about Kyler Gordon and what we saw from him as a rookie, what we've now heard about him through this offseason, and where we should set expectations for year two. We'll hear from Bears defensive coordinator Alan Williams talking about how perhaps Kyler Gordon was trying to do a little too much, running a little bit too high, trying to do a little bit of everything and needing to tone it down and slow down a little bit. We'll hear from Kyler Gordon himself talking about how it's slowed down and what he's kind of gone through this offseason to slow things down and make year two that much stronger for him. And we'll wrap up kind of looking at why, in particular, having him focus on this nickelback role is so important in this Bears, in every defense, but especially in Matt Eberflus's defense with the Chicago Bears. But one of the things we saw last year with Gordon, right, from the get-go, they said, okay, you're going to play the slot and you're also going to play outside. And even though they're both, cornerback positions, they are very different things that you're asking them to do in the offense. Or in the defense. There's a certain skill set that's required for each spot. There's different responsibilities for each spot, different matchups, different asks, not only in coverage, but also in the running game and also as a blitzer or a pass rusher. And that was a lot to put on Kyler Gordon's plate. And we kind of anticipated that maybe it could be too much to put on Kyler Gordon's plate. And I think maybe the Bears felt like this was the time to overload him a little bit and let him work through it as a rookie in kind of a lost year anyway, so that he would be even more prepared for year two and year three. But I really appreciated how defensive coordinator Alan Williams yesterday was able to put in sort of good context why and where things may have been going just a little bit too fast for Kyler Gordon and how he's seeing that change now in year two.
What is the biggest step that Kyler Gordon's made from this time last year to now? That isn't a product of just not being a rookie anymore.
Well, it is a product of not being a rookie. It's just relaxing.
Yeah.
Last year, everything was just in a frenzy because he wants to please, he wants to be so good. So it's just all the time. And now he's relaxing. He's playing within himself. He's got his feet up underneath him. He's communicating more than he did. He already communicated before, but now it's more. So you can see when a guy can relax and go out there, and we call it the RPMs. That is, RPMs are not always in the red all the time. So then if they're not in the red all the time, that he is mentally alert, but is physically relaxed in how he's playing. Now, that doesn't mean that he's not going fast and he's not hustling and running to the ball. It just means that his RPMs aren't super high. So that would be the biggest difference.
Again, that's Chicago Bears defensive coordinator Alan Williams speaking Wednesday about Kyler Gordon at Hallis Hall. And when he talks about RPMs there, right? I mean, not to over-explain this, but it's like your car's speedometer and how hot the engine is roaring, and this idea that Kyler Gordon was trying so hard to be on top of everything and really running on all cylinders, to be seeing everything and trying to run through everything and be aware and on top of everything going on in the game, because there's just so much for him to have to process and get through at the nickel position and also playing at the outside cornerback spot, that now he can slow things down even like he said, like mentally slower, but like physically fat at the same. But even physically slow things down to not have to be so like amped up, so revved up, so on top of absolutely everything, because it'll just come to him a little bit more slowly, a little bit more naturally. That it's sort of this idea of the game slowing down, and then he can be more focused on individual things and can be more within himself and not trying to do so much and on top of everything. And some of that is a result of the team having him focus a little bit more on the nickel corner position as opposed to playing on the outside. But some of that too is just a second year in the NFL, having been through all these experiences and seeing all these things once, and now being able to go through a full offseason with the team and be a part of, OTAs and all that stuff again to kind of work through some of the things he learned from the previous year and be able to do it against better wide receivers now in practice as well. It's worth noting that while the team is having him focus on nickel, they are having him dabble at the outside spots here and there, so he stays relatively fresh there in case, there's injuries and they need to bump him outside there, that it's not like he hasn't done it in months and months and months or years. So there's still going to be some dabbling of that, but certainly, on game day, the plan is for him to be the full-time nickel cornerback and for those RPMs to stay down, for him to be able to just be a little bit more calm, cool, collected, in control, focused, and locked into those spots instead of having so much to juggle and so much running through his brain and so much to try and keep up with to just go 1,000 miles an hour there. Like, he can still physically go 1,000 miles an hour, but his brain doesn't need to go 1,000 miles an hour. And when he's less thinking and more just confidently reacting on the field, it should then speed up some of the processes of how he's working through his reads as a corner or a nickel, I guess, in this case, and should then make things come easier to him, be caught off guard less, and I think avoid some of the kinds of mistakes we saw him make at times throughout his rookie season. A big part of that slowing down process for him has been going back through those plays with more nuance, more time, and more availability to do so now than he did, during the day-to-day of the regular season. You don't have as much time for that. So we'll go through a little bit of what Kyler Gordon said he learned through that process and how he sees that affecting his game moving into this upcoming season next on Locked On Bears. The Locked On Bears podcast is brought to you by our friends at FanDuel, America's #1 sportsbook, because right now, no customers get a no sweat first bet up to $2,500. That's $2,500 back in bonus bets if your first bet doesn't win. Whether you want to bet on the Stanley Cup final, the NBA finals going on, just starting up this upcoming weekend, or the upcoming football season. You have odds for Bears-Packers week 1. You have odds for where the Bears win-loss total will be. You can even bet on next year's NFL draft on who will be the first overall pick in that draft. There's so many different ways to play with FanDuel, all on an app that's safe, secure, and super easy to use. Just visit FanDuel.com/lockedon and get your no-sweat first bet up to $2,500. That's FanDuel.com/lockedon. FanDuel, an official sports betting partner of the NFL and NBA. Kyler Gordon had a lot on his plate last season, and throughout the course of the year, there were injuries around him. He even was injured for part of that season, so he didn't always even have the same cornerbacks next to him. Jalen Johnson missed a few games there, so then Jalen Jones was in, Kendall Vildor missed some games, and by the end, you had all sorts of backups in there and across this whole secondary, and it was not a defense as a whole, but certainly not a secondary, not a cornerback room that was conducive to, stability for young players, for them to be able to turn and say, okay, I'm trying to figure this out, but at least I know I've got a guy next to me or a guy opposite me at corner that's really going to have his stuff together and lock things down. Well, yeah, when Jalen Johnson was out there, but other than that, there was some times there where even the mistakes would be compounded because, they wouldn't have the kind of consistency around Gordon to then correct them or make up for them or limit the damage as a result of some of those mistakes. And as you're going through the course of the season, you may make a mistake against the team and then you got a game again in 7 days. So how much time do you have to kind of go through and correct those mistakes week to week when you're already got to focus on the next? First of all, you got to get healthy and recover, but you also got to focus on the next opponent, get your scouting reports done, and figure out what you got to do to win your very next game. Other than the bye week and maybe the mini bye week after the Thursday night game, there's not a lot of time to go through that process of sort of learning from your mistakes and developing that way throughout the course of the season. So Kyler Gordon took that time to do so this offseason and revealed some of the different things he learned going through that process.
So, on the offseason, One of the first things I did while getting my body right was just going through the season, all the games we played, all the bad plays, good plays, and just stuff to work on. And so I went through that about 2 or 3 times, and really just like you said, I now really feel like I know those situations and experiences that I went through, and I had time to go back and correct it, perfect it, and keep working on it still to this day. But yeah, I definitely feel way more comfortable in the situations I get put in. I feel like I can be in the same spot I was last year and have more knowledge in that area, and not make the same mistake and set myself up for success.
Of all the things you learned, what will be the most useful this year? Things you do this year that you just either didn't, or things you don't do this year that you did, as far as mistakes or whatever. What of all the things you learned, what's the most valuable?
I said one important thing was really just last year for me. I felt like it started becoming easier when I read my keys right and saw the things I was supposed to see, and just kind of brought my vision in and focused on what I was supposed to see and not trying to see everything. I feel like once I did that and I was able to really read what I was supposed to read and not worried about all this other stuff. But not that I'm not supposed to see the formation and the splits and stuff like that, but when I focus on what I was supposed to see, I just feel like I got to play faster, and so that's definitely something that allows me to go.
I think this idea of him just sticking to his keys and sort of the simple things to look for is a similar idea to the RPMs, but I think it's sort of the other, not the other side of the same coin, but the other end of this bargain. And I think some of the stuff Alan Williams was talking about too was just all the things they put on Kyler Gordon's plate having to be managed. But then this that we're hearing from Gordon, I think, is also him maybe trying to do too much within what they're asking him to do. So maybe they asked him to do too much, but then also he may have tried to do too much on his own in terms of trying to be on top of everything. That when they break down an opponent, when they are trying to read things in the game, he talks about the formations and the splits. Okay, if this something you'll find tendencies, right? It's if we're going against this team and a certain wide receiver is in the slot here, then they're more likely to run this kind of route with him in the slot. Or if he's in the slot but up on the line of scrimmage versus in the slot and off on the line of scrimmage, that might be a tell for certain things. Or if it's 3 receivers to one side and 1 to the other, then that might be a certain tell in certain formations. And it sounds to me Kyler Gordon is just trying to do his best to find whatever advantages he can and stay on top of all the different intricate details and understand okay, they're in this formation, I should expect this, and our coverage is this, so I should be on top of that, and need to make sure that I know Jalen Johnson's going to be looking for this, and if Jalen does this, I got to do that, and think through the 10 different things he's got to think through. But the other side of that is just hey, the Bears will coach him and say, watch the way he releases from the line of scrimmage, and if he releases this way, get ready for that, and just read what you need to read. You don't have you want to be aware of as much as you can, but you can't get lost in all the other little details and all the other things you're trying to stay on top of to give yourself the best advantage on the play without making sure you're at least focused and locked in on the main sort of the bigger picture keys, the things that actually matter the most to what you need to do on the play, not even because you can get lost so much in trying to read everything that's going to happen on the field. But Kyler Gordon doesn't have to be intimately involved in a lot of the other details of if he's in man coverage against a receiver, he doesn't need to really pay too much attention to what all the other receivers are doing. You got to know where the ball is and where receivers are, but you don't need to intimately watch them. And if you don't need to intimately watch receivers on the other side of the field, or whether the tight end stays in pass protection or not. All these different things that might be valuable for Gordon to know, but aren't super key to whether or not he is successful or not on a certain play. And it sounded to me like this was just the kind of thing where he needed to slow down over the course of the season and say, what is really important for me to focus on each play? Let me really focus in on those things and not get so caught up in everything else going on around it on the play. Because in football, it's such a complicated sport, especially I think playing cornerback or nickel is one of the most complicated spots in particular on defense. And there's seemingly an infinite number of things that you could try and stay on top of to account for every variable, to put yourself in the best position to succeed on each play. But sometimes it's just doing the simple responsibility right and making sure you're on top of that and kind of letting your teammates worry about some of the other things that might not be as immediately germane to your exact specific assignment on any given play. I think for Gordon, once he can focus on the keys like this and slow that down, then you can start to expand back out and say, okay, now I'm really good at reading what the guy against me is going to do. I'm really good at reading my key. Do I now have extra brain capacity because I've gotten so good at that part to start looking for other things and adding to my game? That way, it looked like he was trying to jump in and try and get everything right away. And it's like, no, let's focus on the simple first thing and then build onto that from there once you really got that down. And it sounds like over the course of the season, he got more and more comfortable with that. I think in particular, it's this nickel position, the slot cornerback spot, that asks a lot of whatever player is there. Not only, I mean, in Matt Eberflus's defense, but it's fairly universal in every defense. And I want to go more specifically in like why nickel tends to be more difficult than the outside cornerback spot, or at least perhaps asks more of the player in there, both generally, and then I want to get into a few specifics of this Matt Eberflus defense that might make it more fun for Kyler Gordon as he describes it, but also a different sort of challenge than just playing purely on the outside. That's next on Locked On Bears. I don't want to insinuate that like the outside cornerback spot is particularly easy compared to the nickel spot, but it seems to me, and I think each player's skill set might provide things either way, but when you think about the responsibilities at each spot, nickel seems more difficult. It doesn't mean it's universally more difficult for everybody. That certainly some guys outside cornerback would be a lot more difficult for a variety of reasons. But the Bears really ask a lot of their nickel cornerback. Most teams do, and it's an important role for Kyler Gordon to master, and it's a big problem when your nickel spot is not particularly locked down. And so I want to get into some of the nuances here, some of the difficulties of that spot, because a couple of things that are more general and then a couple of things that are more specific to the Bears. You know, when you're on the outside, first of all, you're more often facing a wide receiver who's up on the line of scrimmage as opposed to off the line of scrimmage. And when they're up on the line of scrimmage, you then have the more ability to jam them at the line of scrimmage in press coverage, to be able to disrupt their release so they don't get up to full speed as quickly as they want. They don't get exactly where they want on the field. And if you can disrupt them early on the play, then they will be off timing and off script and not where they need to be when they need to be there because you were able to be physical and get in their face. It's not that common that you see slot receivers up on the line of scrimmage to be able to be jammed. And when you're lined up off the line of scrimmage, you know, the cornerback obviously like can't, before the snap at least, cross the line of scrimmage, and they have to, you know, wait for the wide receiver to get to them to be able to jam them. So if you're offset off the line of scrimmage, the wide receiver has more room to work on their release and get as clean of free of a release as possible. So the nickel cornerback doesn't have nearly as much of that opportunity to disrupt the wide receiver right out of their stance. It's why we kind of talk about like teams will put maybe guys that aren't good at breaking press at wide receiver, playing them in the slot because they'll have an easier release because you're just not going to get jammed as much in that regard. Also comparatively, the outside cornerback spot can use the sideline to its advantage. That you know, the wide receiver can't catch the pass when they're on the white grass, like on the paint there. So that's like a little mini wall you can play with and know that you have leverage over there because the wide receiver doesn't want to go that direction or doesn't have as much room to work over there. So you can play knowing that the wide receiver is generally going to want to trend towards the inside of the field, and you can use that sideline as kind of your help as the outside cornerback, compared to the nickel, where at all times the wide receiver has a true two-way go, right? They can go left, they can go right, even no matter where you are in the slot, really. You know, there's room to the outside and the inside, and the nickel has to be prepared for either direction. You can't just push somebody out of bounds and take them out of the play a little bit, or force them to have to fight through contact and tightrope the sideline, because you just don't have that at the nickel cornerback spot. Also, more generally, when you're the slot cornerback, you're a lot closer to the offensive line, like the ball, where the ball is snapped, and then therefore like to the backfield. You're going to be more involved more often in the running play because, you know, the outside cornerbacks are usually farther away, and sometimes the runs don't make it all the way out to the numbers where the outside cornerbacks are, but they're more likely, if a running back is going to bounce it outside, to at least get to where the slot cornerback is, and has to then be a little bit more physical, might be more likely to face a tight end or an offensive line or a fullback as a blocker as opposed to just a wide receiver, and they're going to be asked to have perhaps, I don't want to say more complex, but sort of more important roles in the run defense in terms of the run fit of what you're going to ask that cornerback to do. Particularly in this Chicago Bears defense, Matt Eberflus did this a lot last season and had a history of doing this in Indianapolis, and Alan Williams is a part of that. The slot cornerback is the primary blitzer as far as defensive backs go in this defense. The safeties blitz a decent amount too, but like if you look at the pass rushing numbers last year, outside cornerbacks in this Bears defense almost never blitzed. Jalen Johnson did it like 2 or 3 times over the course of a season. And I think the likes of Kindle Vildor and Jalen Jones, the other outside guys, barely ever blitzed. Kyler Gordon was the leading blitzer at cornerback. And you saw it in the past in Indy, like Kenny Moore and their slot cornerbacks tend to be where they bring the blitz from. So all of a sudden, like, you've got blitz keys and reads, and then you have to, on passing plays, you have to know when you're blitzing and when you're in coverage and how you're supposed to sort of fit into that. And then, of course, all the different skill set that's required with actually being good at blitzing and getting around a block, taking on a block, blitzing in the correct lane, perhaps being a part of a stunt or a twist with your blitz. Like, there's a lot of added responsibility that goes on to that. And I have wondered as a sort of a minor criticism of this defense, if it becomes a little bit too predictable, if tendency-wise they never blitz the outside cornerbacks. I don't think that quarterbacks really have to prepare for that as much of a possibility because they just never do it. Whereas you kind of know the slot is a little bit more likely to blitz, and so opposing offenses can prepare for that a little bit and be more prepared. Of like, you're not going to surprise anybody when Kyler Gordon blitzes and Jalen Johnson never does. And so it becomes particularly important then if the nickel has all these responsibilities in coverage and can't rely as much on the sideline or jam, and they have all these responsibilities in the running game, and they're going to be used as a pass rusher more, it becomes a pretty premium spot in this Bears defense to make sure that you've got a high-quality, competent, consistent player in there. And it puts a lot of responsibility then on Kyler Gordon's shoulders to be better this season, to continue to grow. Like, certainly no one's expecting him to just become a Pro Bowler all of a sudden, but to be able to make fewer of the kind of like mental mistakes that feel very preventable, that felt like inexperience or just felt like a young cornerback trying to figure out how to handle NFL receivers, and that, you know, veteran NFL receivers know how to pull a few tricks on younger corners that haven't had the experience, haven't seen and been around a lot of the different reps necessary to know what different receivers are going to do to potentially attack them. Because one of the things I always like to preach over the years, like when it comes to the cornerback position and the secondary and the defense in general, opposing offenses are always going to attack the weakest link, wherever they can find their best and easiest matchups. And if that's in that nickel spot, all of a sudden it becomes a pretty vulnerable spot in the middle of the field. You know, at least at the sideline, if your cornerback's going to give up the catch, you have the sideline there to try and push them out of bounds and limit the yards after catch. But if your nickel cornerback gets beat, there's a lot of open field in front of that receiver there. I mean, the safeties are there to help, the linebackers are there to help, the whole defense can rally to the ball, but middle of the field is where they can really do some damage, and that's where the nickel cornerback becomes that much more important as well. Again, it should help having a healthy Jalen Johnson, presumably, keeping consistency on the outside, presumably then the other side, Tyreek Stevenson or Kindle Vildor, if they can have one of those guys hold down that spot and be a little more consistent, then Kyler Gordon will have less to worry about and can know where his teammates are going to be at all times and rely on them to properly communicate and pass off coverages and all that stuff. You know, of course, another year for Jaquan Brisker should help. More talented linebacker should help, as well as they sort of share middle of the field responsibilities. The question becomes how well will the pass rush, you know, force guys like Kyler Gordon to have to cover extra long because the pass rush is not there. That's a real concern there. But it sounds like as things slow down for Gordon, as he's not running so high on the RPMs, we should be able to find more consistency from him. And we need to. As a second-round pick, he needs to start playing closer and closer to that level, and we're certainly willing to give him that rookie season as having a lot on his plate and a lot going a little bit too fast, and now less on his plate, better defense around him, things should slow down, and the improvement then should come, or else we're going to have some very real concerns about how his career is going to pan out from here. Certainly, we'll keep close tabs on Kyler Gordon's development throughout the offseason and into the regular season. We'll be bringing you any and all updates we get on Kyler Gordon throughout the year on the Locked On Bears podcast, so make sure you hit that subscribe button on YouTube or wherever you listen to podcasts. That's going to be the best way to keep up with all of our daily, in-depth Chicago Bears news and analysis. Thanks for making Locked On Bears your first listen today. We love our everydayers that tune in 5 days a week here on the Locked On Podcast Network. We're your team every day. Tomorrow, some more OTAs updates. We'll hear about Cody Whitehair's transition back to center, how he described it as kind of like riding a bike. We'll also hear why the Bears have confidence in their own defensive linemen, the defensive ends in particular, but might still try and go out and get some more of those guys as well. And we'll leave some room there in case we get any new, bigger developing Bears breaking news, because June 1st, teams start getting more salary cap space, and I think we're going to start seeing free agents get signed, whether it's by the Bears or other teams, starting tomorrow, or I guess after tomorrow, once the salary cap updates from the post-June 1st cuts. So I wouldn't be surprised if the Bears are going to bring in a defensive end if that happens soon, and we might have to have that conversation a little bit more expanded on tomorrow's podcast. So make sure you come back to tune in for that. And of course, you have to come back for your next opportunity to bear down.